Okay, so I'm going to give you an update of, or a review, a short review of the main markers of smoke impact that we can look for. And I'm going to present to you the results of a study from 2018 that has been initiated in Lake County. Key findings on what we learned, the new things that we learned from that study. Does everybody hear me? Yes, okay. So, quick overview. That's a model of lignin. Lignin is one of the main components of wood and straw. When lignin burns, it breaks apart. That's a big polymer, and it breaks down in smaller molecules that can become airborne, that are volatile, that have an odor. Okay? If it breaks down here, you're getting guaiacol. If you break down here, you're getting 4-methyl guaiacol, and that's our main markers of smoke impact so far. More have been proposed. 3 cresols, these molecules, phenol itself, that's the most simple one, and 2 syringols. All these compounds, when they're absorbed by grapes, become mostly bound to some sugars. That's a defense mechanism. That's the way that the cell, the live cell, can make them water-soluble and dump them in the vacuole where they won't interact with vital metabolism. Okay? And the AWRI offers testing for 6 of these glycosylated markers, so bound to sugars. 2018, we experienced the largest fire in California history, Mendocino Complex Fire, and it was next to in Lake County, where most of the grapes there are produced. And they were particularly worried about the Cabernet Sauvignon, and they looked into the literature, and they found a lot of conflicting and confusing information about possible tests for smoke impact. So they decided to initiate a study with the collaboration of the UC Collaborative Extension, the AWRI, and us at ETS. The study design was this. They took fruit from Cabernet Sauvignon vineyards more or less exposed to smoke. The fruit was split and samples were sent to ETS for direct analysis of the berries. That's the test that we've been doing for the last 10 years. And they did small-scale ferments, small-scale fermentations or microferments or bucket ferments. And the samples, the wine samples, a bucket, it was in larger volumes, but the wines obtained were tasted. There were also samples were sent to the AWRI for volatile and glycosylated markers, and to us also, so that we measure volatile markers, a more extended panel, and also glycosylated markers that was in the research and development stage at that point. The main results have been published in the current issue of Wine Business Monthly. I strongly recommend you read it. It's by the excellent Glenn McGourty with UC Cooperative Extension. And here are the key findings. Okay, the concentration of guaiacols found in fruit were highly correlated, not only to those in wine, but also the sensory analysis of the wine. What does it mean? It means that they worked as good markers of smoke impact in grape and fruit. In grape, because the grape concentrations predicted well the wine concentrations, and that's one of the examples here. That's the microferments that were done closer to harvest. So on the x-axis, you have the concentration in berries, y-axis in the wines. Okay, and you have a strong correlation. We find always less in berries than in wine because during fermentation, part of the glycosylated markers are hydrolyzed. Okay? So there's a multiplier between both. But basically, this confirmed the guidelines that we give you for interpretation of results in grapes, in berries. We give you results down to 0.5 ppb, or microgram per kilo, for guaiacol. At that level, below that level, to us, the risk is low. There is no clear evidence of absorption of smoke compounds at that level. And then, the higher the levels, the higher the risk of smoke characters showing up in wine. From moderate to high, on past 2 ppb or so in grapes, you're almost sure to end up with smoke characters in your wine. Second finding about sensory evaluation of the wines that were obtained. Above 6 ppb or so, microgram per liter, difficult. Below that, it was difficult for everybody to find smoke characters. And that's another confirmation of the guidelines that we give for wine interpretation. Basically, levels between 1 and 2, that's quite typical to see that in red wines, even not exposed to smoke. That looks like normal baseline results. Around 3 or so, you're more in a gray area where some people often start to identify some smoke characters and some don't. The higher it goes, the more likely it is to find smoke characters. Past 6 ppb or so, almost everybody gets it. If you don't get it, it's because it's masked by something else, but it will show up. Okay. So in 2018, a lot of people did these microferments, and it turned out a great tool for an assessment of the risk when you're making your commercial wine. Here are the pros and cons. To me, the biggest advantage is that you don't have this multiplier between grape results and wines. It's a more direct prediction. One advantage also is that you can taste these wines, but be careful with that, because when you are in the gray area, again, where some people notice it or not, it's tricky, it's difficult. Okay, so it's best to combine both, to do tasting and support it with analysis. The big advantage of grape analysis is that you have almost immediate results. You don't have to wait for 10 days or so for a fermentation to be completed. Okay, and it still gives you a good idea of the risk that you are facing. So now, so that was more about a confirmation of what we had observed basically for the last 10 years, but a very good confirmation. We learned a few more things. So because we looked at more compounds. And if you talk to Glenn McGorty, he's going to tell you basically, well, it looks like when we looked at guaiacol, and for methyl guaiacol, we knew about pretty much everything we needed to know. Because everything else looked really well correlated with these two compounds. So, and that's an example here. X-axis, you have guaiacol in the microferments. Y, you have orthocresol. Okay, one of the cresols. The correlation is pretty much perfect. Okay, so that's a correlation chart, and correlation charts are useful when you want to compare two compounds with each other. Problem is, we looked at 32 compounds. If we wanted to compare 32 compounds to each other, we would have to make more than 1,000 of these charts. So what you do in that case, you do a correlation matrix or correlation table where you show your correlation coefficients. And to make it easier to look at, you use colors. And here, what is green is things that are well correlated to each other. So, here. So basically, you put your compounds here on the way on this column. Here, you put the same compounds in this row. Here, if you look at the diagonal, it's only green and it's 1 because everything is correlated perfectly with itself. But if you look at the column here, you see that guaiacol is correlated with all of these compounds, but not with this one. And with methyl cyrangol, actually, there was so little, it was not even reportable. That was the AWRI results in microferments. It was confirmed by our results. That's ETS results. There's a little bit more. We detected methylserangol in some of the samples, not all. We looked at phenol also, and it turned out that phenol was also well correlated with smoke exposure and with all the other compounds. But again, not the serangols. So that was a surprise, or not that much. If we look now at volatile compounds and glycosylated compounds, it becomes more complicated. You barely can read what's there. But the take-home message is that all the 6 glycosylated AWRI markers were well correlated to volatile markers, except volatile serangols. That's our table here, which gives the same results. So in very dark green here, you see the volatile compounds compared to each other. And here, volatile compounds compared to the glycosylated markers. Some are red, some are green. The table is symmetrical, so the information here is the same as the one here. Okay, and here, that's the glycosylated compounds against each other. Take-home message here is first a confirmation of AWRI results, especially what is in orange here, that's the 6 glycosylated markers that they report. And it turned out it was the best ones. So what they selected in Australia looks to be valid here too. There's a few other markers that seem to be valid also, and we're at the point where we have to decide, okay, which ones are we going to report, to measure. Okay. The big surprise here, not that much, because we had some sense of this going to happen from looking at data a few years ago and doing some data mining when we started to look at an extended panel. Volatile serangols did not seem to be related to the smoke impact. Why that? Are they absent from the smoke here? That's unlikely. Are they not absorbed by grapes? No. Because there's one class of serangols bound to sugars, to some sugars, the gentiobioside, that are clearly related to smoke impact. So they're coming from somewhere. They are in the smoke, they're absorbed by the grapes, but there's pretty much no free forms left in the grapes for them to be good markers. So that's the explications that we propose here. It looks like there is a strong specificity of glycosylation, a preferential binding of some volatile compounds, smoke compounds, to some sugars and not others. The guaiacols, cresols, phenol bind preferentially to one sugar, retinose. Serangol to another one, and not others. That seems to contradict the results of a recent paper, 2017. It was about the linking to glucose only, and they found that it was done by an enzyme in the fruit that is very unspecific. They say promiscuous. Okay, basically that's an enzyme that can bind, and we ended up with this idea that this enzyme can bind pretty much any smoke compound, volatile compound, to any sugar. That's not the case. The efficiency also of glycosylation seems variable. With guaiacols, as I said, enough free compounds remain in grapes for them to be good markers of smoke impact. It's a little bit like the, one of the criticism of that is you're looking only at the visible part of the iceberg. Yes. But even an ice cube, if you can look at something small enough, has a visible part. It can't escape. Okay? With serangols, it looks like the efficiency is close to 100%. Virtually, there's nothing left in grapes for them to be useful markers. The stability of the glycosylated compound is very variable too. Glycosylated guaiacols, also cresols, phenols, are partially hydrolyzed during fermentation. You end up with more in wine of the free forms than you had in fruit. With glycosylated syringols, it looks like they are completely resistant to hydrolysis. So in wine, they are not relevant either. So, summary of testing options here. There's 3 things that we need, basically. We need a test to have a good idea of the risk in grapes, and we have that. We need a test to confirm in commercial wines, really in commercial wines, what the impact is, and we have that as long as there is no contact with oak. And we need a test for oaked wines. So your options here, volatile guaiacols, useful for risk assessment before harvest in grapes and microferments, confirmation at the end of primary fermentation. What is critical is to be able to measure very low levels, down to 0.5 ppb in grapes or less, actually, 1 ppb in wines. Additional volatile phenols. There are several useful markers, but apparently not the syringols. They might be useful in wines to confirm interference of toasted oak because they are coming from toasted oak, on the other hand. Okay? Glycosylated phenols, yes, we confirm that the 6 markers from the AWRI seem to be absolutely valid here. A few others might be useful, and they will be essential to assess oaked wines. So at this point, what we're doing at ETS, we're analyzing wines, 100% specific variety, to have an idea of what would be the natural levels in wines when there was no smoke impact. Okay, and that's going to be crucial because we need that information when we start giving you results to tell you, okay, to give you some information about what they mean. Okay. Thank you for your attention. I would like also to thank, by the way, the Lake County Wine Grape Commission. They really did what they have to do, which was to initiate this study, and more importantly, they accepted to share their results to everybody else. And they didn't get any funding for that. It was all their money, and all the work that we did at ETS with the glycosylated markers, more markers, and that's ETS money. Okay, so but I think we can thank them for this gift to us. Questions? Yes.
On measuring the mini fermentations, did you guys add a glycosidase enzyme pre and post to see the difference between bound and free?
Okay. So something that seems very appealing is, okay, why not hydrolyzing wines or fruit and then measure before, after, and have a good idea of the whole pool of glycosylated compounds. To our experience, it doesn't work. We have tried, we haven't seen a single trial with enzymes that works. The other option in a lab is heat and acid treatment, and a few labs do that. We chose not to do it. When we started to look into that, we did not like what we saw. Very unreproducible results to start with, and that's why the AWRI doesn't propose that. So when we worked on it, we could figure it out. We can get reproducible results, and then we liked even less what we saw. Basically, if you hydrolyze, if you treat a wine with heat and at a low pH, pH 1, you're making guaiacols, and you keep making them. What was proposed so far was 1 hour treatment. Probably not enough. So now it's proposed 4 hours. But if you look more than 4 hours, it keeps increasing in most wines. So stopping at 1 hour or 4 hours and calling that total guaiacols, that's a fanciful name. Okay? Maybe it would be useful if you can actually have a database and have a better sense of what is already present, what has nothing to do with smoke. But at this point, so we chose to look directly at some of the glycosylated markers, and we're on the same page with the AWRI. Okay. Yes.
What's your, I feel with the smoke analysis, and especially with sensory, there's a lot of difficulties with that, and confirmation bias, and we're just really beginning to understand how the interaction takes place with our mouth and with our own enzymatic activity that we have personally. So with your research, I was curious, was this done at the AWRI Sensory Services, or was this internally with ETS?
Okay, so about sensory, so that was about, let's go back. That was about that slide, right?
Because you talked about great sensory and then quiet sensory as well.
Okay, so that's wines. To us, there is a good correlation between guaiacols and sensory, as long as you're not dealing with Syrah, because Syrah has already guaiacol, and you're not dealing with oaked wines. Again, not magic numbers, but more than 6 ppb or so, almost everybody gets it. And if you don't, again, that's because it's masked by something else. It can be reduction, it can be oxidation. That's why very often, especially when you're in the gray area between 3-4 ppb or so, a lot of times, young wines, you don't smell it. It's covered by fermentation esters. Then there's malolactic, some oxidation characters that are masking also. And then you do your SO2 addition. Guess what happens? It shows up. It's not that it was just created, it was there to start with. And the analysis can tell you that, because you are in this 3-4 ppb area. Okay? Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you.